I think turning 30 has changed me because I like eating dosa now. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know how that happened. Like, I went to the temple with Amma and Anna, and I had one bite of a dosa there, and now I'm obsessed.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Have You Eaten? My name is Shashank, and this is my sister Jyotsna.
Hello.
This podcast has been a space for us to talk about the immigrant experience of growing up in Australia. And in this episode today, we're fortunate enough for Miss Shimoga to take us back to school and teach us about a topic that I actually had no idea about. And you have gotten into your little research den and have a lot to talk to us about. So I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, thank you. There will be a pop quiz, so pay attention, kids. No, I accidentally stumbled upon Australia's history in terms of our immigration policies and legislation and the discrimination that happened systematically and lawfully as well, which just blew my mind. So I went down this massive rabbit hole, and I want to share that with you today because I think it's a really, really important conversation to have. And on that note, you might have noticed that we're not posting regularly, and that is to be expected from us at Have You Eaten because we only want to share content with you when we've had great conversation, thought provoking, intelligent conversation that either has come across to us in our lives or maybe you've shared with us. So please do keep those feedback channels and comment channels open and share your honest thoughts because we really, really appreciate it. And we hope you enjoy this episode. So, today's episode is all about immigration policies in Australia and how that's impacted who we are today as an immigrant community. We learned this back in school for sure, but I think we were taught this so early on that we probably didn't have the maturity to quite comprehend the implications of these policies and laws and regulations that were in place to systematically discriminate against particular groups of people purely because of their race and the color of their skin, nothing else. And I think some of this might make us a little bit angry today. It might make us a little bit upset, but that's kind of what I'm looking for, do you know? Because we need to talk about this. We need to resurface some of these issues, and we need to make sure that we are continuing the momentum of changing our belief systems and breaking down some of those value systems that don't serve us anymore. So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, I think it's actually like fascinating because when you brought up doing this episode and the topic itself, I probably did learn it in school, but I have no recollection of learning it, and definitely not to the extent of how it's even affecting my life today. So I'm really excited because I am ready to learn. Mrs. Shimoga's in session. Go for it.
I would suck as a teacher. I would be so bad. I'd be like, what don't you get? So easy. Anyway, I'm actually also keen to hear your perspectives on some of the things I'm going to share because you're a lawyer. You know, you've just entered the Australian legal system and working with the law. So I'm keen to hear what you think about from that perspective as well. So, have you heard of the White Australia policy?
Vaguely.
Yeah. So, do you know what? I think it rang a bell. I think I associated it with Pauline Hanson and some of the drama that she creates on TV, and I didn't give it much thought. And it was a bit of it was actually comedy, if anything. I was like, oh, this silly girl. Do you know what I mean? And once I started to look into it, I realized how prevalent those values and those days have impacted who we are today. So the White Australia policy was only abolished in 1970. That's 50 years ago.
Yeah, that's younger than our parents.
Yeah, I know. So the policy came into place in, I think it was about the like 1800s, 1850s, because Australia had a massive gold rush. And there was a lot of Chinese immigration that came in, and basically Australians, quote unquote, British colonizers didn't like that. They wanted the gold to themselves. They wanted to keep the resources that they were exploiting off the stolen land. And so there was a lot of racial tension and this kind of unofficial regulations and policies came into place. And then eventually it was formalized to discriminate against Asian and Pacific Islander immigrants specifically. And
Mhm.
one of the ways they did that was by putting in a language test that only immigrants from these countries had to do, where they had to write 50 words from any European language that was assigned to them on the day.
Oh,
Can you imagine that? And the people that
yeah.
were coming in from England and any other European nation uh, didn't have to do anything. In fact, they had criminal records and they were still sent to this country, right? So I think that kind of that irked me a lot. First and foremost, because it was on stolen land. This land doesn't even belong to you. You've already, created genocide and destroyed Aboriginal culture and ecosystems and social structures. On top of that, you are then discriminating against the colonies that you colonized and also broke their structures and their social systems and made them feel inferior systematically for hundreds and hundreds of years.
I had no idea. So even that, like the language, the dictation test that you said,
Yeah.
I had no idea.
So basically, what happened was, and I'm just looking at my notes here because there are so many dates and I got a bit carried away, I'm not going to lie. But in 1973, under the Whitlam government, the White Australia policy officially ended. And under Holt and Whitlam, the Racial Discrimination Act was passed, making immigration based on skill rather than race. But if you
Yeah.
think about the implications of decades and decades of systematic discrimination, right? Like it is almost inherent in you. It has been inputted deep into your brain that people from these nations or people from these cultures are not as good as you. And they're coming here to take your land, to take your wealth, to take your resources. When in fact, it's exactly what you've done. It's just that you haven't been told that that's what you were doing, right? And
Yeah.
like it was almost encouraged behavior. It was a level of entitlement for you to say, oh, the British colonized this. This is our land now. We own it. So you can come over here and you can take whatever you like because we've made that possible for you. So I think those implications have actually bled into who we are today as young Australians from immigrant backgrounds. And whether you're first generation, second generation, it there are belief systems in you. I guarantee you, if you sit down and reflect for 5 minutes, you will find belief systems that have come from the legacy of those laws and regulations that were in place. If you compare that, for example, to immigration patterns in the UK, right? There were Asian immigrants coming into the UK in the 1600s and 1700s. So when we were talking, I don't know if you guys have listened to previous episodes or if this is your first one, welcome. But in our previous episodes, we were talking about how our British Indian friends have this really strong sense of cultural identity that we don't have, and so as I started to read into this, that started to make sense because for hundreds of years they've had the opportunity to really establish themselves in England, make it home, and find a subsection of those two cultures that bring out the best in both of those worlds and work for them, and they can be celebrated for their British heritage, but they can also be celebrated for their Indian heritage.
Like as you were speaking, I think the ideas that are coming to mind for me are they actually are very embedded into our brains. Like there's definitely economic implications. I'm sure you'll go through social implications, cultural implications, like so many things that I am now that is now firing my brain that I'm like, well, actually, maybe it's because of how what Australia is, and this is how Australia was conceptualized, and what only from 1973 Racial Discrimination Act.
Yep.
So barely any time.
No. In our parents' lifetime, like we came to Australia in the 90s. So there was only
Hmm.
20 years prior to that where we could come to this country based on skill, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't have that head start. We didn't have the connections here. We didn't know what the economic, political, socio climate was for us to bring us over here. We had to kind of have these pioneers in our in our communities back home that took that risk. And I think
Mhm.
our parents were part of that phase of immigration, right? Because they, when they moved over here, they didn't know a single soul, and they kind of had maybe heard, I'm not sure, um, of the racism and the discrimination that was still taking place, and they still took that risk because they came here for that better life. And that goes to the first point of economic impact, right? So maybe we start there, we talk about that. Because if you think about the types of roles that a lot of immigrants have, even today, right? It's not just 20 years ago, 30 years ago when our parents moved, even today, the roles that we are taking in society are the background roles. Like, have we ever taken a moment to recognize that? It was a conversation I was having with a friend recently, and he actually raised it to me and said, have you noticed that we always back of house in the kitchen? We're always the Uber drivers, the petrol station workers, the jobs that kind of don't disrupt too much, because we quietly, we don't protest, we quietly kind of make our money, make our worth, make our impact because we don't want to disrupt it too much. And I wonder how
Yeah.
that's impacted us as first generation kids, right? Like, you're a
Yeah.
lawyer. Where did that come from?
Yeah. I think, well, I was always taught growing up, like, there was always put in your mind, like, stability. Like, I think that was the word that was like it was ingrained to the point where that was the only thing that your parents ever wanted. With the law, it's as we were growing up, you're taught to find and secure a stable career. And that's what part of the reason why I did law was probably, even though I may not have addressed it as I picked it,
Subconsciously.
was it is a very subconsciously, it's a very stable career. There's always going to be a legal system. You're always going to need a lawyer. Everyone's, suing someone or getting divorced or whatever it is. Where you can't kill us off. At least who knows with AI and whatever. But for now, I'm the firm believer that you can't kill us off. And I think there's must be some contributing factor subconsciously of why I picked that. And I think that goes into probably like a risk taking mentality because when our parents got here and they were essentially growing up, I think that is the right term because they got here in their 20s
Mm.
and they were chasing stability because they were trying to fit into this post, like almost racially separated Australia and trying to fit in and gain that stability.
I think what happens there is the survival mindset kicks in, right? You're coming here for a better life. You are coming here with dependents more often than not. A lot of our family friends, and including our parents as well, they didn't come here as single people with a big risk appetite. They came here with partners and children and parents perhaps back home and siblings back home that they had to support. And that's why they were willing to take that risk and make that big leap of unknown to provide that life for not just themselves, but their extended family as well. So that survival mindset just doesn't go away. You don't kind of build your wealth or become stable, quote unquote, and then all of a sudden you switch to taking more risk and finding your passion. And that has to be slowly and painstakingly pulled out bit by bit from your essence, from your being, because it's no longer serving you. It did serve you once upon a
Yeah.
time, and you have to be grateful for that. So if you're sitting at home and this is resonating with you, I'd encourage you to maybe pause and take 5 minutes to reflect on some of the belief systems that you have today. If you're struggling to do this exercise, because it can be a bit difficult to kind of pull some of these deep rooted beliefs out of nowhere, just take a moment to go back to a time where you've made a really big decision in your life recently around career, around money, around your next financial step, even. So, whether that's buying a house, investing somewhere, whatever else. What thought processes did you go through before making that decision? Not which bank should I go with, right? I bought this house, for example, right? And the thought process was, okay, I've been given this money, right? Because I was given a chunk of money to then go invest in my name, and I need to make a safe, steady bet with that money. I cannot take too many risks. I cannot kind of go wild. I cannot think, oh, maybe I'll put half in Bitcoin and then half in, there was still some of those limiting belief systems that came into play before I took that risk and bought the house. And I think buying a house is still a risk, right? But it's a calculated, much more lower grade risk than some of the other areas that could have potentially paid off as well. I don't know. I didn't even think about it. So if you're at home and you're thinking about this, pause, take a moment, reflect, and really understand where those systems are coming from. And then as you move forward as well, really think about why do I believe what I believe? And where did that belief system come from? Is it serving me anymore? Because what we've understood already, and this, we're just getting started with this discussion, is that we have systematically been told for hundreds and hundreds of years that we are not as good as blank. You can fill in the blank. Okay. You are not as good as, because nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your skill sets, your intelligence, nothing to do with that, purely because of where you come from and the color of your skin. And
Yeah.
the point of this conversation is not to separate and create anger, but it's to fuel you fuel you to do it differently, and fuel you to think about things differently, and fuel you to dream bigger. That is my goal for this conversation.
Yeah. And I think you raised like a very interesting point where, not, work almost that like work hard mindset because you've been told you're not good enough. That's also something that's deeply embedded in your brain. Because that feeling of like almost an imposter syndrome, and I have had this conversation probably 50 times with 50 different people. So if you're listening and I've talked to you about this, welcome back. But that imposter syndrome mindset is so like deeply rooted in my brain because I was taught that by our parents, where you need to work hard and you need to be tenfold better than the next person to even get to their level or beat them, and to stay at the top. And then if I don't reach that point, it feels like, oh, I failed, and oh, maybe I shouldn't even be here and I don't deserve this.
Mm.
And all those mindsets are just like something that I carry with me all the time, and I can sense it and I try to fight it, but it's always still there.
Yeah. So the recovery time for when you fail is wider. So that makes you more risk averse. Makes sense. It's
Yeah,
a it's a
exactly.
it's a logical equation for sure. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not sitting here telling you to blame yourself or others for not dreaming bigger or taking more risks. It's unfortunately how you've been programmed, but you have to sit there and reprogram. And I think that's happening. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later in the episode, but I think it is happening, which does give me hope. So I think another element to this conversation is the social impacts that it's had, right? Outside of just work and money and career and stuff like that, there are ways that it's impacted how we make friends, who we connect with more, or where we feel a sense of belonging and where we don't.
I think the belonging point that you raise is like really interesting because I feel like when I've made friends, it's majority of my friends are actually from are either first generation or second generation, like nothing past that. Not a big majority of my friends have had grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents who are Australian. Um, a lot of them have immigrant upbringings, and I think that almost brings us together because we get each other. So even like one of my good friends at work, she grew up with ethnic parents, and sometimes that's our bonding point.
I think you can connect some of these belief systems and value systems to the historical context that I've shared today, right? Because if you think about, the abolishing of the White Australia policy and introducing a Racial Discrimination Act and slowly immigration taking off from some of these Asian countries and Pacific Islander countries that were banned essentially from moving to Australia, those communities moved over here and nobody looked like them. There were very, very small groups that understood their historic, like cultural context, very small groups of people who understood who they were. Maybe there was a language barrier. So you gravitated towards other people, even if it wasn't your exact group, like community, you gravitated towards people who can relate to the struggles. And whether you like it or not, I think those values have been passed on in our
Yeah,
generation. And
definitely.
even some of the younger kids in our community, right? They've been born here, their parents are pretty much, even if they weren't born here, they've been living in Australia for longer than they've not been living in Australia and have assimilated to this culture. But even still, I think there are some of these belief systems around sense of belonging and imposter syndrome and survival mindset has still passed on to them, unfortunately. Right? And it's not
Yeah,
all bad. I'm saying unfortunately, but as I'm thinking about it, it wasn't all bad. I think having a survival mindset has given us all a healthy risk appetite, perhaps, or not having a, a sense of like belonging has made us more adaptable and understanding and open-minded and malleable to different sets of people and groups because we can adapt with lots of different people, right? Because we're able to
yeah,
change. What the mental implications and emotional implications of that is on you is a different story. But those skill sets have been developed through that experience.
yeah. And it's not all negative. Like
No,
for example, growing with a survival mindset and belonging, like that means that I found friends that grew up with similar, like I'm going to put the word struggles in quotation here,
yeah,
but an example I can think of is in high school, I was a I was very sensible. Like I didn't do anything dumb that, teenagers are probably doing. Like I didn't drink till I was 18 and all those things. But that's because my friend group in high school grew up with ethnic parents or Indian parents that said, no, you should never touch alcohol.
definitely makes sense because it wasn't just the slap on the wrist, right? It felt like there were much bigger consequences of taking some of those risks, even at a young age. Even though now you might look at it and go, "Oh, that was just me being silly and young and stupid," but taking those risks at such a young age and being caught and the risk of failing at holding up your parents' reputation, at holding up your own reputation, not doing well at school, not getting into uni. Like it just felt like so many dominoes were stacked up against a really small decision like uh, buying alcohol underage and drinking at a friend's party.
Yeah,
And the dominoes went all the way to your 30s and 40s. At the time, that's
yeah,
how big it felt. And that's what was instilled in us is
mhm,
if you do something stupid, that not only impacts you, that impacts me as your parent, it impacts our society. It is a reflection on the entire immigrant community in India
yeah,
if you get caught drinking underage.
yeah,
Like that's
exactly.
a lot of pressure for like a teenager, but that is
Yeah,
kind of what we were told.
yeah. And it's still true. Like it, I don't think it's gone for me, definitely. Like
No,
if I'm being a nuisance in the street with my friends and just having a good time or whatever, I still have that feeling like, oh my God, we actually represent our race.
yeah,
But where's that coming from?
You know where it's coming from? It's coming from the fact that, yes, you are absolutely Australian and you are entitled to this country as much as the next person. But for generations, for decades, you've been told that this is a special thing that you've been given. It's a special opportunity that your parents have made a multitude of sacrifices for you. They have foregone living with their parents, their cousins, and in a country that belongs to them, where they have cultural roots and significance and power and influence and belonging and spiritual grounding in. All of that so that you could go to a good school, that you could learn English, that you could get a good job. And that kind of pressure will always be on your shoulders as an immigrant child. That
Yeah,
will never, ever, ever go away. And unfortunately, I even predict that if we have children, we will pass it on to those children as well. Subconsciously, we're going to actively
yeah,
try not to, but I think there are some subconscious mindsets still, you know, that will be passed on. And that is coming from somebody who's actively trying to dismantle some of her belief systems. I still think I would if I had children. Even this podcast to
mhm,
some extent, right? Imagine how much, no, not imagine, how much thought did we put into the topics that we talk about and the way we're going to
yeah,
talk about those topics? Because it wasn't that we were just sharing our opinions that happen to be a little bit controversial. We are sitting here thinking about the implications that these conversations have, the words that we use have on us, on our friends and family, on our community, amongst people outside of our community, depending on how many people
yeah,
will look to this and carry this conversation. And part of it's good, right? Part of it is good because it allows us to be a lot more mindful about what we talk about. And part of it is bad because I still feel caged to some extent to share my true opinions and true values. And that is, this podcast is an exercise of breaking that, because this is my truth. This is a lot of other people's truth. It does need to be shared. It does need to be stopped and broken down,
yeah,
because it does not serve me. It does not serve you. It does not serve our parents. It does not serve our friends and family. It does not serve our community to feel like we are inferior, to feel like we don't belong, that we aren't entitled to the land, the resources that we have earned.
yeah,
No, we haven't just been given it, that we've earned.
mhm,
Caveat every single thing I say with on stolen land.
yeah,
That's a conversation above us at this point. I don't have the skill sets to have it, but
mhm,
acknowledging that the traditional owners of this land have been slaughtered on this land for us to be here and have this conversation.
yeah. To add to that last point, I think the best way I can sum it up is every decision, if you take that as a step, it feels like you're wearing a weighted backpack in every step. And it's like part of it is probably you're adding bricks into your backpack that you don't need to. Part of it is there are bricks in the backpack that you can't take out no matter what happens. So there is a mix of both. But I just, to picturize it, how much harder it is to take 10 steps with a weighted backpack compared to nothing. I think that's the best way I can sum it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But then again, a weighted backpack's made you stronger. Your legs are stronger.
Yeah,
You can carry
yeah.
more. If you lighten the load as you go on, because it doesn't serve you anymore, you know, your steps are going to be wider. Perhaps the stance that you're going to take is going to be wider because you have the strength and you have the experience and you have the capacity to do so.
I wanted to ask you this because we have an age difference. So we've grown up in different settings. Same parents, same everything. But the one thing that I still grapple with is almost internalized racism. So I differentiate myself while, even if necessarily other people are not doing so. So, like, an example is I'll go on a boys' trip with five Indian men, and I'll go to the middle of New South Wales, and I'll be walking through the street, and no one even cares that I'm there. They probably don't even recognize that I'm there. But in my head, everyone's staring at me. They're wondering, why do these five brown people walk into our suburb? Like, or, it just doesn't make any sense. But I think, have you felt that as well? Like, as you go outside and you've traveled a lot as well.
Yeah, I think it's the internalized racism is definitely a thing for sure. Once again, goes back to all the things that we talked about and why it's there. And I think it is valid to some extent. There is a bit of, perhaps it's not a negative um, gaze, but it is a curious gaze, right? Because I
Yeah.
sense it. As soon as you walk into a predominantly Caucasian environment of any kind, whether that's board meetings, business meetings for me, or or like you said, country towns or places in Australia that don't have much diversity, you can definitely sense it. I pick up, oh, what's that? That looks new. And
Yeah.
sometimes there's been negative in situations, but for the most part, it's a curious gaze, which I don't really mind. I would much
Yeah.
rather that. In terms of the internalized racism, that's why I'm saying it's valid because those experiences do happen, have happened, and continue to happen. And so it does make sense. And I don't know that we can break it down,
Mhm.
unfortunately, because it's
Yeah.
how it is how society is still. I
Yeah.
think that our children are going to face that. If you look at the immigration trends and patterns in Australia right now, it's completely changing. The demographic
Yeah.
Australia is completely changing. So I do not think that it's going to be weird to go to country Australia and see people from different immigrant backgrounds farming there or having homes there and making a living there while they are encapsulating Australian culture and Australian traditions. They're also bringing their Middle Eastern values, or they're bringing their Indian like cultural heritage, or they're bringing their African foods to these places, right?
Yeah.
So I'm excited for that change, but I don't think the internal dilemma and self-talk is going to go away, unfortunately, because of the environment that we're in.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I have actively tried to stop myself from doing because whether it's true or not, whether that racism is true or not, by internalizing it, I feel like it's a limiting belief. Like I'm saying, oh, I shouldn't be in this country town because I don't look like everyone else. But that might not even be the case. So why put that limiting belief? So I guess if you're listening and you've gone, yeah, I've actually done a trip and gone, come back and been like, oh, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I've said that sentence, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And I just want someone who's listening, next time you step into that situation where you feel like you do stick out like a sore thumb, think about it and be like, no, I think that's just people looking at you as they would on the street. It's not because you're different. And just slightly break that down because even if it is true or isn't true, it's just you need to slowly phase that out of your head, is what I think.
Well, what if it wasn't, what if you'd still acknowledge that thought? Because I think that thought's going to happen. I don't think you can completely get rid of it. But what if you
Hmm.
acknowledge that thought as, these people looking at me because I'm different, yes, but from with a positive gaze, like of out of curiosity. Not like,
Yeah,
what are you doing here? You're not meant to be here. But rather, like you look a bit different to the regulars that I see around here, but that's
yeah,
it. That is the limit. That is the extent that they are giving you any thought and consideration, and they're moving on just as anybody else. But I would encourage, because I think, and this is perhaps a controversial opinion, but I think as people from immigrant backgrounds, we still have some responsibility to represent our community well. Just because there is
hmm,
still deep embedded racism in Australia, it is not, it is maybe going away, but it still exists. And the only way that we can break this is to show our culture and show our heritage in a positive light. right? Just
Yep.
as I might see kids like hooligans doing wheelies outside and graffitiing on my fence and running amok, I'm not judging them based on what they look like. I'm judging them based on their actions. And that's always going to be the case for us as well. People are going to judge you based on your actions. And this has happened to me sometimes where if I'm out in public, I get treated a certain way from other Indian men because they know I'm Indian, right?
Yeah.
And other people are witnessing this interaction. So I think having an extended level of mutual respect, having an extended level of mutual acknowledgement, and holding up our reputation in society is going to be beneficial for us. I think we should always strive to be our best selves. And when we fail, we can acknowledge that failure and move on. That's not the point I'm trying to make. It's not, how do I put this? It's not free for all. It's not just, yep, like we fought so hard, rules and regulations have changed. We no longer, identify with the inferior immigrant identity, so we can do whatever we want and be whoever we want and claim anything that I want as my own. That's not
Yeah.
that shouldn't be the attitude. The attitude should still be with, which is our values. That's who we are as Indians, right? And other immigrant cultures have similar values of respect for elders, for respect for family, for respect for women. I think it's important to uphold those values, regardless of who you identify as, and what cultural identity you identify as, or how long you've lived
Yeah.
here, or whether you're born here or not.
To dumb it down for myself, I would say it's a reframing from, oh, I'm Indian and I'm different, to I'm Australian, I have Indian heritage, I was born here, but I represent other Indians who were born here, who have called this home, and this is all they know. And I'm a reflection of that, and I want that to be positive. I want people to look at me and go, oh, like, yeah, he's of Indian background, but you know, I'm going to break down those differences that I have in my head and really get to know this person.
Yep. Let me dumb it down
Yeah.
even further. I don't care if you were purple, right? To look at, like, I
Mhm.
want you to show respect for each other. I want you to show integrity and honesty and all the other things that makes a human a good human.
Yeah.
But I do acknowledge that we have a different experience. We have a different experience on a day-to-day basis with daily interactions with different situations. We have a different experience if as opposed to people perhaps who are Caucasian. I think the only difference here is that if you are of African background, of Indian background, of Middle Eastern background, whatever you might be living in Australia, you don't have a choice when you step out of the house as to who you want to be that day, right? Because on your face, on your skin, on your eyes, in your hair, in your talk, your walk, everything, people can identify you as being of a different background. As opposed to my Caucasian friends who can step out that day and say, do you know what? I just don't feel political today. I don't have a political opinion today. I know there's a lot of racism and discrimination happening in the world today, but I'm emotionally exhausted and I cannot advocate for this cause today, right? And they take a break, they put it on pause for a minute. We can't do that. That is the biggest difference to me, is that
Mhm.
when I step out today and I face racism or I face discrimination or I see it happening, I have to take a stance. I have to advocate for myself or I have to advocate for the other person having that experience. And that is emotionally exhausting and it is emotionally draining. And that is both a curse and a blessing. And you have to, if you are of immigrant background listening to this, it's a fight that unfortunately you've inherited that you have to continue.
This
Go
is going
on.
to be a controversial route to take. But yes, I do acknowledge that racism still exists. I just don't think it's as prominent anymore. And I'll explain why. Is I've always associated with racism as a barrier to success for me. But now that I've kind of entered the corporate world and I have basically assimilated into working with, so many different people, I don't actually see it as a limiting factor anymore because, especially even at my workplace, like different backgrounds are highly valued actually. And a lot of our senior leadership come from very different backgrounds. So it almost gives me like hope that I don't think it's as much of a thing anymore. Like, just I used to think that. I used to think, oh, like I'm brown, or like who would make me CEO? But I don't really have that anymore. Like I can go as high up as I want, and no one's going to stop me purely because of the color of my skin. It might be a multitude of other factors, but it's not been going to be because of that.
I agree with you to some extent. Yes, in the corporate world, things have changed because of very strict diversity um, and representation policies that have come into place and such a proactive approach to changing that. Yes, I agree. But that is a very narrow look at racism in Australia today. Because if it's still
Mhm.
happening in society, if it's still happening in our schools, in our social circles, even if it's casual, even if it's under the breath, jokey, and don't get me wrong, I will take you know a slightly risky joke any day, and I can laugh at myself, and that's but it's when it's meant with a little bit of truth, that's a true belief that that person has, and it manifests in some of their other decision making and viewpoints in the world. That's when it's problematic. But unfortunately,
Mhm.
it still does exist. And I think a clear example of that is, what do you see on TV? What do you see on mainstream TV today in Australia? The Logies are coming up in Australia. I want you to observe who's on the red carpet. It's a bunch of white
Mhm.
people. Who is on the Dancing with the Stars? A bunch of white people, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's still very prevalent in our society, subconsciously and very low key. Yes, MasterChef has a couple of cooks from all over the world. That's great. And, but I don't want to keep going back to SBS and ABC to see people that look like me, right? I
Yeah.
want us to be in mainstream media. I want us to be in high level positions in the workforce. I want us to be in politics. I want us to be in social situations where we are comfortable being our true authentic selves, whether that means you identify as 70% immigrant and 30% Australian, or 10% Australian and 90% immigrant. Whatever your identity is, doesn't matter. The point is that you're here, that you respect the country that you live in, you respect the people that are your neighbors, and you are a positively contributing citizen to the society that you have chosen to be a part of.
I think, yeah, I'm viewing it very narrowly from my personal day-to-day experience. So I think you're right. I do have to broaden my lens and see it from a more holistic perspective. But
But it makes sense why you might be viewing it that
yeah,
way, right? Because you're at work 8 hours a day, Monday to Friday. That's predominantly where you're spending your time, and you don't feel discriminated against in that situation, which is
and
a testament to the efforts of our government and our
yeah,
policymakers for having diversity policies in place. And a lot of these corporate companies have to report on their diversity
yeah,
um, stats.
yeah. Also, survival mindset. It doesn't bother me on a day-to-day basis. Let me keep my head down and just keep working. Why
Yeah,
should I take a
exactly. Yeah,
stance and differentiate myself even more?
yeah. And I think that's the point of this conversation, is that if you've got it in you, if you've got the fire in you, fight for it. Fight for it
Yep.
harder, stronger, louder, bigger. Not with hate, not with look what they did to us. By no means that is not what I'm advocating. I am sitting here and advocating for think bigger, dream bigger,
Yep.
do better as well, work harder, work stronger, but work for the things that mean something to you. Not just
Yeah.
because, oh my God, so many sacrifices have been made. You've been given this opportunity. What are you going to do with it? Prove yourself, make our family like proud of you. You know, no, those things are important and it might play an element in your decision making. But overall, I don't know, you should be entitled to have a dream,
Yeah.
right? That is the definition of better life, surely. It is the
Yeah.
immigrant motto, a better life. I'm thinking about changing the podcast title to better life.
It's not getting glimpses though. I
Yes.
think like I'm seeing more and more like immigrant influences or first generation immigrant influences. Like one of my favorite comedians is Nazim Hussein, and
Common
he's
household Australian
everywhere.
name now.
Yeah, like I could walk down the street and say Nazim Hussein, and I'm sure at least 50-60% of people would identify him. And that's a non-conventional profession. Like brown
Totally.
people didn't go, no, I'm going to be a Canadian because that's
Totally.
not stable. It's not stable income. But I think that's a good example of like pushing past that and taking those chances and really finding that purpose
Yeah.
and going beyond what you were told and
Uh,
doing what you actually wanted to do.
if you even think about, and I'm gonna sound like an old woman here, but like when I'm talking to young people these days, I'm talking like teenagers and like even younger, and you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Their dreams are big. They want to be singers, they want to be actors, they want to be musicians, they want to be astronomers, and and they have these big wide dreams that are not just dreams like we had when we were at school, being like, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a policewoman. Like, they're actually legit dreams that could happen and feel
Yeah,
tangible. So I agree with you. I think we're seeing glimpses of change, and that momentum will only continue if people like you and me and the people listening here today question the belief systems that they have, identify the ones that are working for them and keep them, and identify the ones that aren't, and take those bricks out of that backpack, baby, because
yeah,
you are holding yourself back, and we all collectively have the capacity to dream bigger and do better because
yeah,
of our immigrant backgrounds, because we have those amazing skill sets that have come from survival mindset, that have come from imposter syndrome, that have come from a lack of belonging, that have come from, the pressures of managing the reputation of an entire community in a foreign country. Because of all those struggles, like you said, quote unquote, we have these unique skill sets that could propel us to do amazing things in media, in politics, in law, and actually make a genuine change for future generations.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest takeaway from these conversations, right? It's we want to see tangible change, and we know that people who are listening and can relate to this content are the ones that want to make that tangible change, but maybe are not they haven't taken the time to step back and go, oh, actually, I do think that way, and I have questioned it before, but why do I question? And like have all these thoughts. This is a good platform, not only for me and you to discuss, but for people to listen and go, okay, I'm going to make these tangible changes as well because other people are thinking this way and build that snowball.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for a good chat as always, remotely, which is a shame.